Chapter 6 of Morningstar Esthajnalcsillag. Morningstar wanted to spend every moment of the summer months out on the free beach. The family's plan did not agree with her wishes. She was carted off to her paternal grandmother's house, to a small village about 3 hours' drive from her lake. Here she felt as if she was suffocating, like a fish out of water. She needed her lake. Morningstar could not possibly imagine a vacation spot without a body of water. Well, these dreaded visits to her paternal grandmother's house became a ritual. Morningstar's older brother was more tolerated by the paternal side of her family because they claimed he looked like one of them. This was not the case, but Morningstar accepted the adult's irrational way of thinking as soon as she was old enough to form an opinion of her own. This idea that her brother was more like his father was just another one of the adult's many nonsensical things. Morningstar thought to herself. Morningstar reasoned that since she was probably adopted, only her parents hiding the truth from her, she could not possibly resemble her paternal side of the family anyways. So our little girl stood silently as the paternal grandmother made snide remarks about Morningstar's young, beautiful mother and the maternal grandmother. She never argued. It would have been totally useless anyway. The paternal grandmother was so overcome with hate for the daughter-in-law that nothing would change her behavior toward Morningstar. Often, Morningstar was put on a train and sent to visit her maternal grandmother in another, smaller village close by to her town. These visits she looked forward to. At her maternal grandmother's house, Morningstar received only positive remarks and encouraging smiles. However, the great-grandmother of Morningstar did often object to the way our little girl was dressed. The great-grandmother, in her very old-fashioned way, wanted Morningstar to be dressed in a summer long-sleeved blouse and a skirt that covered her knees. Morningstar's parents dressed her in an apron dress in the summer that had no sleeves and barely covered her round little bottom, let alone her knees. The train station was almost in the back of Morningstar's house in Siófok. Oftentimes she would run to the backyard and watch the trains coming and going. This way the train conductors and ticket handlers all knew Morningstar. While she was little, her parents would buy Morningstar's ticket to her grandmother's house and then find a young soldier or someone else traveling to the maternal grandmother's house. Then they would hand the little girl over to this person and tell him where to drop the child off. At the same time, the conductor was also alerted to the fact that Morningstar is traveling with her parents' permission. This was necessary because sometimes when Morningstar became a bit older, she took the train and forgot to tell her parents of this matter ahead of time. Our little girl loved these train rides. But the scent of the sun-drenched earth in summer, as the wheat was ripening and ready to be harvested, stayed in her memory for many decades to come. The smell of the rich black earth as it was overturned by the plows, the scent of the field flowers, the singing of the women as they harvested, all remained embedded in the little girl's mind. Morningstar was thought to shut her mouth and open her eyes and ears. This made her very observant of all things going on around her. One day, Morningstar heard a train pulling into the railroad station. She became conscious of the fact that the train had not pulled out of the station, but was over on a side track that was almost within reaching distance of Morningstar's backyard fence. So the little girl ran out to see what's going on. There, she saw what was described as cattle wagons. But in those wagons, there were soldiers, Hungarian soldiers. The little girl stood by the fence and watched. One of the soldiers called out to Morningstar to bring him some water. The little girl did not move because she saw the Russian commander approach the beef wagon also. And then the Hungarian soldier told her not to be afraid. All they want is a drink of water. They are thirsty and hot, and the Russians won't let them get a drink. By then, the Russian officer had arrived and ordered Morningstar to return to her house and told her not to come out again until this load of beef wagons had left. The little girl was very disturbed by what she saw and wanted answers to her questions. So she decided to ask her father. This, as you might guess, was not such a grand idea. Her father told the little girl that she did not see any soldiers. That afternoon, she did not see any wagons on the side rails, and that the little girl certainly did not hold a conversation with a Russian officer. No Russian soldiers were at the railroad station. Morningstar did not understand the meaning of all this. Her father, who always demanded the truth, is telling Morningstar to lie, not only telling her, but ordering her in no uncertain terms to lie about what she saw. This was to be only the first of many necessary lies in order to stay alive in those years and to keep Morningstar's father out of jail, or worse, to be executed. Our little girl fired the things she saw and heard into the back of her mind, but she did not forget. She drew her own conclusions. Answers were not given. She answered her own questions. Morningstar was never taught or told to hate the Russian soldiers. It just sort of came from the air. She got the feeling from people around her that these soldiers were less than human. They were not to be talked or looked at. No one would befriend any of these soldiers, not even after most of the officers' families joined them in Hungary. They were separated from the Hungarian people. The little girl could not understand these feelings. Morningstar saw these Russian families at the beach, and they looked perfectly normal to her, not like some monsters, as she heard the adults refer to them. But our little girl did as she was told and kept her opinion to herself. This open mind of Morningstar and her quick way of thinking saved her from many problems in the future years. At Morningstar's maternal grandmother's house, she was always welcomed. The little girl's grandmother would ask Morningstar what she would like to eat. Would she like a nice roast duckling, some stuffed chicken, or fried chicken? Morningstar's answer was always the same. Her favorite food, prepared by her beloved grandmother, was lentil soup and stats. Stats is a flour, lard, salt, and water mixture made in such a way as to form tiny balls of dough as it is frying in the pan. This is not easy to do as we might think, because if not done properly, it has a tendency to turn into a paste like inedible mess. It took quite a few years for Morningstar to master the making of this favorite dish of hers. When Morningstar was about 6 years old, she wanted to accompany her grandmother to the harvest. She knew this was very hard work done in the heat of the summer sun. Morningstar figured that while she's too small to do any work in the fields, and she is not used to such work either, she could still carry water and food for the harvesters. The little girl noticed the other village girls doing this. When Morningstar arrived at the wheat fields, she took off her sandals and went on to the freshly harvested fields, barefooted, like the other children were. This was a very bad idea of hers. You see, the freshly harvested wheat leaves short stalks behind that are as sharp as razor blades. Morningstar's feet were soon covered in her own blood as she tried to bravely follow the other children onto the fields. Their feet were already hardened and used to this turf, whereas Morningstar was basically a city girl, not used to the hardships of village life. As soon as his grandmother realized what Morningstar is up to, she called for the little girl's uncle to pick her up and take her out of the wheat fields. Our little girl sat on the edge of the fields, nursing her sore and bleeding feet. She vowed that she would get as strong as the village children. After the harvest was finished, the whole village had a big dance with food and drinks and live music. At one of these dances, Morningstar's grandmother was the head cook. She told Morningstar that they would be eating their evening meal at this dance. Being outdoors all day long, Morningstar was very hungry and ate a delicious meal supervised by her grandmother with delight. She, she thought it was a wonderful meal until she was told that the stew was made from mutton and lamb. Then I'm afraid our little girl lost the supper in a most unladylike fashion. She threw up. This did not please her grandmother. Morningstar had never eaten mutton or lamb before, and she was reminded of the little lambs in the farm's yard that she used to play with, and now she ate these creatures. This was just too much for a little girl to understand that in the villages, this was the way things were done. All the meat that winds up on a person's table was once a cute little baby animal, and we have to slaughter them to eat them. This is the lambs, the hogs, the chicken, and etc. This is why they are raised. Morningstar, after this experience, never ate any lamb again. She also refused to eat deer meat or rabbit meat. Morningstar's paternal grandmother decided that at the age of 6, Morningstar should be useful around the house when the little girl went to visit her. She started to make the Morningstar help with the cleaning and clothes washing. Morningstar did not mind. The little girl did this kind of helping out at home also. When her grandmother told Morningstar to take the goats out to the nearby fields and small wooden area, she nearly died of shock. Our little girl was not used to taking care of animals, especially not goats. She could manage the dogs and cats and goldfishes around the house, but goats? No, she thought to herself. Now this can't be so hard to do. All the other young children do it. Morningstar went out early in the morning, dragging the miserable goat behind her on a rope to a nearby wooded area. She was supposed to stay there all day long and let the goat eat whatever goats eat. Of course, Morningstar did not know which part of a plant the animal is supposed to eat or where to take the goat to fend for itself. Morningstar was nearly in tears. She was so petrified of this animal. The only thing she could possibly imagine to be worse than this was her aunt's horses on the other side of the town. Her aunt was related to Morningstar through the aunt's father, who was Morningstar's paternal grandmother's brother. This man had large black horses that he used to pull his horse-drawn wagon. The uncle would cart many items, including wine and wheat and whatever else people asked him to take from one place to the next. Now, this aunt's father looked like a typical Hungarian peasant man with a large mustache and twinkling eyes, always full of mischief. This man thought it was grand fun to tease our little girl. He always wanted her to sit up on the wagon with him so he could take Morningstar for a ride. Since Morningstar was scared to death of these huge horses, she did her best to avoid being around them. It wasn't that she did not like these animals. There just weren't any of them around in town where Morningstar lived. That way, she never had a chance to get used to them. So there was our little girl, sitting at the edge of the field that was near the wooded piece of land where she managed to transport the goat to. She started crying at first. She knew that if something had happened to the blasted animal, she would be punished severely by her paternal grandmother. So she took the goat, that by this time she loathed from the bottom of her heart, and tied the animal to a tree. This way, she deducted, the goat could not possibly get into too much trouble. Then Morningstar sat down on the green, soft grass of the field, and I am afraid she fell asleep, just like any other 6-year-old would have done. To Morningstar's misfortune, her grandmother decided to check up on her to see how she's getting along with the nanny goat. When her grandmother saw Morningstar asleep in the field and the goat tied up to a tree, all hell broke loose. She told the little girl that she was useless and that even an idiot is able to take care of a goat. Morningstar thought that, as usual, she was right. The family made a wrong choice when they adopted her. She was even a failure at babysitting a miserable goat. Morningstar's grandmother had ducks and chickens and pigs at her farmyard. Morningstar loved to play with dolls and learned how to do basic sewing skills by making dresses for these dolls. Morningstar thought that the baby ducklings just recently hatched looked to be a bit especially in the spring sunshine. So our little logical girl decided to dress the ducklings up, just as if they were dolls. Morningstar put little hats on the ducklings. She tied a ribbon to these little hats into a nice, tight bow. All this pampering and loving care of the ducklings resulted in 3 ducklings choking, another 2 drowning, from Morningstar trying to revive them by dunking them in a pail of cold water. After she noticed that the ducklings fainted, you see, she tied the ribbon so tight around the little ducks' necks that they suffocated. When her grandmother noticed what had happened, she was very cross with Morningstar, but did not punish her. The maternal grandmother realized that Morningstar did not mean to harm the baby ducks. She was just playing. This is how Morningstar learned about what to do and what not to do with farm animals. Morningstar enjoyed feeding these animals. She even gave the pigs their food. The little girl tried hard not to think about the fact that at Christmas time this would be her supper more than likely. The little girl was never allowed to be at home when the hogs or the chickens were killed. The family doctor was of the opinion that such a sight would be too disturbing for the little girl. Morningstar was thankful for this doctor's wisdom. When the little girl would hear the noises of a hog being butchered, she would hide under the covers and pull even a pillow over her head to block out the noise of the hog's mournful squealing. End of chapter 6.